Conspiracy theories, disinformation, and highly charged arguments have left us feeling divided as a country politically. Can people on opposite sides come together for constructive discussions? Well, I recently spoke with Professor Dr. Nolan Higdon, who co-authored the book, Let's Agree to Disagree, a critical thinking guide to communication, conflict management, and critical media literacy. Here's what he had to say about building bridges in our society. Dr. Higdon, welcome.
No, thank you for having me.
So the description of your book says that democracy hangs in the balance in this age of divisive discourse and disinformation. So clearly this country has lived many moments where we've been extremely politically divided. Is this time that we're living different?
I think so. And it is true that we've had many times where we've been divided. I mean, obviously a civil war comes to mind. But I think what's really new about this era is a lot of the media and technology that we have make it very different. Information can travel much further and faster, which is something we admire about the 21st century. But it also means false information can travel further and faster. And so people who create false information can now reach audiences much faster, which means people can believe information much quicker and act upon it much quicker on a much larger scale. So I think the issue we have today, as opposed to earlier generations, is just the scale of information that's out there.
So you blame media for a lot of our political polarization. How so?
I think they contribute to it. I wouldn't solely blame media. I think there's definitely some of the political class that also engages in divisive behavior, and voters, quite frankly, who vote for divisive figures, I think play a role. But media, I wouldn't necessarily indict all media. There are great journalists out there doing great work, and journalism is essential for democracy.
Absolutely.
But I think a lot of news outlets have found ways to keep audiences and make themselves profitable by appealing to partisanship. I think this started in cable news. I think legacy papers got involved once they went to subscriber models on the internet. They want to capture those subscribers and keep them. I even think a lot of independent news media figures now online are experiencing audience capture. They want to report what keeps their audience. They don't want to report things that alienate their audience. And a great example of this was the Dominion lawsuit, where Fox News had claimed the 2020 election was stolen, and they blamed this company, Dominion. Dominion sued them, and thanks to the discovery process, we found text messages where Fox News personalities knew the election was not stolen, were mocking people who believed it, but they kept having guests on that said it was stolen because that's what their audience wanted to hear. And I think that's a prime example of a lot of the problems in today's media, is that they gravitate toward that profit or audience capture and not truth.
So you essentially travel the country teaching critical media literacy. What does that mean? And what is your advice to all of us as we all, we're trying to get informed about what's happening on the issues so we can vote for the right candidate? What's your advice to all of us?
Well, critical media literacy is about teaching students how to think, not what to think. It's different than other media literacy that might say, like, don't use the cell phone or don't use the internet. That's not critical media literacy. Critical media literacy is about giving students the skills and perspective to evaluate media for themselves and decide what relationship they want with media. So maybe they don't want social media, maybe they do. That's up to them to decide. But what we teach them is to ask questions. So who owns the media outlet? What messages are they sending? What messages are they not sending? Who do these messages benefit? Who do they not benefit? What sort of conflicts of interest might exist between the message being produced and the message sent? So those are the type of things we just teach students to do. Ask questions, be more critical of media. I think too often we think of things like films or doom scrolling on the internet as some passive activity we do to waste time. Actually, you're getting messages, you're getting knowledge, you're getting perspective in that. And so you should have your critical brain on, asking questions about, is what I'm hearing true? Is it false? What else is missing? Things like that.
How do you, advise students, or any of us really, when, we all have our trusted news sources? Does it leave people saying, well, who can you trust at this point?
I think looking at the news source is obviously very helpful, but I encourage audiences to interrogate everything. So look at who owns that news source. Is it government funded? Is it privately funded? Is it foundation funded? How might that impact their message? But even if news outlets have a history of, say, getting things wrong from time to time, like New York Times famously bumbled some of the reporting on weapons of mass destruction before the 2003 invasion of Iraq, that's not to say the New York Times, everything in there is false. They also do really great reporting. And so I think another piece of the puzzle is not just following particular outlets, but following particular journalists and personalities who consistently get things right, who consistently gravitate toward truth and fact and not necessarily partisan proclivities. So by identifying those individuals and following them around, I think you'll be a more responsible news user.
So in your book, Let's Agree to Disagree, you're really trying to foster this idea of constructive dialogue across the country. How do we do that when a lot of us believe that people, I'll say on the opposing side, have beliefs that they believe are harmful to this country, or that they believe in policies that they think will hurt this country?
Well, I think engaging with people on a human level is really what we emphasize in the book. Democracy necessitates communication, and even people I disagree with, in a democracy, we all get a vote, and as part of that voting process, if someone's voting one way, it affects me. So it's my job in a democracy to work 24/7 to try and convince people to support the policies and perspectives that I have. And I think we've lost that in this country. We found ways we can block people or censor people we don't want to talk to. And all that does is further put us in these bubbles of reality. And so I'm asking for folks to do something a little more radical. Engage with people you disagree with. Don't lecture them. Listen to them. Share evidence you have. Ask them to share evidence. Maybe you'll find out they don't have evidence, or maybe you'll change your mind. Who knows? But finding people on some human, decent level, you can do a lot of good. Now, having said that, there are some folks who are hateful. They're not willing to engage with you respectfully. And if you're unable to set boundaries with those folks, then a constructive dialogue is impossible with that particular individual. I would encourage you to use your energy elsewhere. Put it into someone who is willing to engage with you in a good faith discussion.
So I've heard you speaking on a couple different platforms, and one of your consistent themes is that democracy is a 24-hour job for all of us. What do you think that job is for us all as individuals?
Well, I think that job is to keep yourself as informed as possible. That means looking at news, investigating news, talking to people with different viewpoints. I think it also means engaging with other people in the electorate. And I know a lot of folks say that that's a lot of work. You know, got to read news every day, got to talk to people every day. And I remind them it is a 24-hour a day job, but they're in luck. If they don't want to do all that work, there are authoritarian regimes who are looking for people who don't want to do anything.
You talk about how despite the media landscape right now, that you're still optimistic. What are you optimistic about when we are so politically divided?
I generally get the sense there's a hunger for democracy in this country, and I think people are exhausted by the partisanship. I can't tell you how many conversations I've had with people, and they ask what I do, and they say, oh gosh, I don't pay attention to politics. It's just two sides squabbling at each other. And I think that resonates with a lot of people. We've seen surveys as well. I think there's a hunger for constructive dialogue and democracy. And I'm really infused by what I see like a lot of young people doing right now. They're creating alternate media and alternate narratives. And I think they're putting pressure on some folks in the establishment to think about things in different ways. And so I'm optimistic about the future for those reasons.
And I assume you would say that we're not as divided as we think we are, or at least the majority of us are not.
Yeah, I read about this extensively. Because so much of our news media puts everything in a red versus blue frame, we see everything as red versus blue. But the reality is we don't disagree on that much in a lot of cases. A lot of news media tends to focus on things that are divisive, where there are things that we agree that just don't get a lot of attention in news media. And so I think we often think we're more divided than we are. And that also is compounded by a lot of these opinion writers and talkers who they know they keep their audience by confirming their bias and attacking a caricature of the other side. So we increasingly see the other side as something they're not, and I think it messes with our brain and how we think about talking to people.
Dr. Higdon, we really appreciate this conversation. Thank you so much.
Thank you.